How's it going, everyone? I'm Jared Johnson, the Jared J. Y'all might have seen this guy once or twice if you've seen any of my videos.
Just maybe.
Just maybe. It's an 82 or 14% chance.
We know what that means.
We know exactly what that means. Talmadge Roger Farnado III is here with us again.
Thank
Welcome,
you, sir.
Talmadge.
I appreciate it.
Oh, indubitably. And thank you for being here.
No question.
So there's just no question. So we're going to stay on the NBA topic. And we're going to do another top 10 list. Talmadge and I are both going to be discussing our top 10 centers in NBA history. And I just want to clarify real quickly. These are based on their careers in the National Basketball Association. Has nothing to do with their college career. Has nothing to do with their ABA career overseas. You could maybe put some other guys in the conversation if we factor that in. This is based on their careers in the National Basketball Association. So top 10 centers in NBA history is what this is all about. As we do, just like we did with our Denzel top 10 list. He hadn't seen my list. I hadn't seen his.
Well, most of yours. I've seen one.
He did get a glimpse of my screen a while ago, but he hasn't seen most of my list. So why don't you kick us off? Why don't you give us your number 10 and your number 9?
Okay. I'll be more than happy to do that. And I would say that, again, I think our lists are going to be very similar. Centers are probably pretty easy to do in the NBA because
I think so.
We might be off by one or two plays, but the interesting part is going to be what order we place them in.
That's what I'm curious to see as well, yeah.
And the other challenge is this. You know, a lot of times when you have these lists in your head, especially if you're an old guy like me, 53 years old, you have a list for years and years and years, but new players come in every year. At what point do you stick a new player in at the expense of someone else?
And who does he replace?
Right.
That's the big thing.
So I tried to find the balance of newer players versus history.
Okay.
But understanding that it's not a slight to anyone. These lists are so hard, and as more years pass, they become harder and harder and harder. Exactly. But that being said, I wanted to start with number 10, and I actually have a current NBA player, Joel Embiid.
Oh, okay.
I think that, and to the point I just made, 2 years ago, he would not have been on the list. Mm-hmm. And he could easily fall off the list because he hadn't had the established career or longevity. We don't know how his career is going to play out.
He's still going.
If, unfortunately, he gets hurt next year and never plays again, does that keep him on the list? Has he done enough to stay? But I wanted to pay credit to someone that's currently playing because he has won an MVP. He is one of the best centers, especially back to the basket moves, post-up moves. He can face up and shoot it. In fact, he's got the best footwork at center since Akeem Olajuwon, in my opinion.
I agree. And he's got the combination of the size, the shot blocking, and the perimeter shooting.
Both sides of the court.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I'm going to put him there knowing that, he's got to play some more, but I think he's earned that number 10 spot for me for those reasons. Philadelphia's own. Number 9, a little lower than most people might have him, but I'll explain that as I go into other names on the list. But I'm going with Patrick Ewing.
Okay.
I know some folks have him a little higher, but newer players I think have kind of changed that a little bit for me. But defensively, and I know you said just their NBA careers, but I got to bring it up. In college, I thought this guy was the best defensive player I'd ever seen in my life. Now, it translated in the pros, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But because of other centers that were in the league at that time, he was never first team all defense.
Yeah.
He never really was number one in any category. He never led the league in rebounds. He never led the league in block shots. So that's why he's kind of lower on the list. But don't want to take away from what he did. He was a multiple-time All-Star, obviously. He's a Hall of Famer. He was a Knicks legend. So he definitely earns a spot on the list. So Patrick Ewing is my number 9.
Okay. Very solid start to kick us off. I'm going to go my 10, my 9, my 8, and my 7.
All right.
So everybody get comfortable. All right, at number 10, I have a guy that a lot of our younger viewers probably have no idea about. So go do some research after that. Bob McAdoo.
Know him well.
6'9", 210 pounds. Even in his era, to play center at that size, pretty darn impressive, my opinion. He played 14 seasons, 5-time All-Star, league MVP in 1975, posted career averages of 22.1 points, 9.4 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks per game. Not the most phenomenal, which is why he's number 10
Right.
on my list, but still a pretty darn good career. And to the point we made in a previous episode, he was good enough to be on somebody's roster for 14 seasons.
That's a lot.
And he still put up those kind of numbers. When you average 22.1 points and 9.4 rebounds for a career, and you were 6'9", 210, you did it for 14 years, that's worth being on the list, in my opinion. He was pretty darn good. All right, moving on. At number 9, I have a current player, Mr. Nikola Jokic. Actually pronounced Jokic. 6'11", 284 pounds. He's a big old boy.
Yes, he is.
So far, he's played 8 seasons. He's in his 9th season. And I will say this. Y'all will find out as we go. And Talmadge has already heard me talk about this. Longevity is a huge factor for me. Because I look at it, just like you said with Joel Embiid. Up until this season, Nikola Jokic was not on my list. Because my mindset is, if this guy suffered a career-ending injury today, would he belong in the top 10? I'm not going to say, yeah, but look how many more years. I don't know if he has any more years.
Right.
I hope he does. I don't know that. What he's done so far, does he deserve to be top 10? And up until this past season, he was not on my list. He is now. He's in his 9th season. So in 8 full seasons, he was all-rookie first team. He's been a 5-time All-Star, 2-time league MVP, 2021-2022, Finals MVP, 2023. He has 116 career triple-doubles.
That's a lot.
4th all-time. The guy's in his 9th season. He's 4th all-time in triple-doubles. My goodness, if it seems like I'm excited, it's because I am. That is phenomenal. When I knew he was versatile. When I did my research and came across that number, I thought, my goodness, this guy, it earned me even more respect. I've seen him play. I know his game. But when I saw that, it's like he's ripping up triple-doubles at an astounding rate. Alarming, in fact.
Yeah.
Last season, 2022-2023, he averaged 24.5 points, 11.8 rebounds, 9.8 assists. He was 0.2 of assists away from averaging a triple-double for the entire season. This current season, thus far, as of early this morning, I did double-check my stats, he is averaging 26 points, 12.2 rebounds, and 9.1 assists per game. For his career thus far, 20.5 points, 10.6 rebounds, 6.8 assists per game. That has to be, at least to my knowledge, and I'll almost guarantee, that's easily the highest assist per game total for any center. 6.8. I don't see any way that anybody else could be. Spoiler alert, nobody else on my top 10 centers has averaged assists close to that. The guy does not shoot a crazy amount of shots. Plays within the game, just like he said with Embiid. He can play his back to the basket. He's big enough and strong enough. If you're dumb enough to not double team him, he's going to make you pay. He's a brilliant passer. He makes some passes. I've seen him get rebounds, bring it up the court, and then thread the needle with a great bounce pass. He can also rip the three. 2 nights ago, he hit a 39-footer off the dribble to beat the Golden State Warriors. I was watching that game. He took the inbound pass. First of all, why do you inbound to your center?
Because he's
Nikola. Yeah. He goes and drives and launches a 39-footer, banks it in for the 3-point win. Stephen Curry just stood there with this dumbfounded look on his face. I'm not trying to pick on Stephen. You'll find out as we go along. He's one of my all-time favorite players. Nikola banked in that 3, and they were interviewing him after the game. Charles Barkley asked him, "Hey, Nikola, did you call bank on that last shot?" And Jokic just smiled and said, "My friend, it went in. I'm happy." And they all start laughing. But, yeah, the young man's a phenomenal player. If his career ended today, I think he's a top 10 center of all time. I could go on and on about how impressive the triple-doubles are. I think he's a guy that's just going to continue to get better if he does continue to play. So there's my number 9. At number 8, here's our first overlap. I have Patrick Ewing. And I do know that his last name's not correctly pronounced that way. If you want to comment and tell me that I said it wrong, that's still okay. But I'm going to call him Ewing. 7 foot, 255 pounder. Played 17 seasons in the league. 1986 NBA Rookie of the Year, 11-time All-Star, member of the original Olympic Dream Team. Career averages of 21 points, 9.8 rebounds, 2.4 blocks per game. So his points aren't quite as high as, actually for his career, his points are right around the same as Nikola Jokic. Rebounds a little bit lower. Blocks are higher, and he did it for 17 seasons. So to your point, he was never the best center in the league, but he played in the era, and you'll hear as we go along, some of the absolute best centers of all time. Ewing played against Olajuwon, David Robinson, Shaquille O'Neal, and even guys that weren't on that level, but guys like Rick Smith and Mark Eaton and Brad Daugherty and Alonzo Mourning, Dikembe Mutombo. Ewing played with a lot of elite centers, and he lasted 17 seasons, put up those numbers. No, he was never the best player in the league. He's one of those guys that you always talk about. He's kind of that next level down, which is why I have him at number 8. But certainly a premier center. Certainly, anybody that's on either of these lists, it's a tremendous amount of respect that we have for them, or you wouldn't even be mentioned here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead now with my number 7 and then kick it back over to Talmadge. This guy lasted even longer in the league. Moses Malone, I have at number 7. 6 foot 10 inch, 260 pounds, another big old boy.
Yes.
Played 19 seasons, 13-time All-Star, 74-75 All-Rookie, 3-time League MVP, Finals MVP 1983, led the league in rebounding 6 different times, career averages of 20.6 points, 12.2 rebounds, 1.3 blocks per game. This guy, in his prime, was an absolute load. He was like right before Robinson, Ewing, Olajuwon. But at one time, he was him and Kareem.
A healthy Bill Walton.
A healthy Bill Walton, but that was like your premier centers. But yeah, Moses was a load. He could bully people around. The biggest reason I don't have him higher than 7th is that while I respect tremendously that he played 19 seasons, there's a reason he was a 13-time All-Star. His last few years, he's slowed down a lot. Mostly with age, but by the end of his career, he wasn't much of a difference maker. I hate to say it, just being honest. By the end of his career, he wasn't a great player anymore. You knew that he was if you knew who Moses Malone was, and he's legendary. Everybody that's basketball educated, I don't have to convince them that Moses Malone was a great player. Biggest reason he's not higher than 7th for me is that while I love his longevity, and I hate to say this about anybody, but he's a guy that might have had a better legacy if he retired 3 or 4 years sooner. Just being honest. So anyway, that's my number 7. Talmadge, why don't you give us your 8, 7, 6, and 5?
All right, well, these are some names you've heard before.
There we go.
Actually, like 20 seconds ago. Number 8, I'm going with the Joker.
Okay.
Most versatile center we've seen.
Yeah.
You did bring up the point about you'd be foolish not to double team him. I'm going to quarrel with you a little bit on that. While it's foolish not to double team him, it's also foolish to double team him because when you do, it opens up the pass. And he's
true.
He's such a great passer. That's the dilemma. What do you do?
Pick your poison, ultimately.
Do you mix it up and say, well, we'll see if he can figure it out? Do you go all with one strategy versus the other? He's going to beat you either way. So
he really is.
Good luck. And that's why it's number 8 with room to go up because there's a lot of career left, hopefully, for him. Number 7 is the gentleman you just spoke about, Moses Malone.
So we both have him as number 7.
No question. I think the big thing for me with Moses is, out of all the players on this list, I think he did more with less.
Good point.
Wasn't a great athlete. Did not have great hands. In fact, Tom Nasalki, who's an old coach for the Houston Rockets that coached Moses and also did the broadcast of Rockets games for part of Hakeem Olajuwon's career, actually said if Moses had the hands of Hakeem, he would have been the best player of all time.
Wow.
Because Moses did not have good hands. Moses couldn't jump. Moses wasn't a great athlete. Moses could get up and down the floor, but he wasn't a gazelle like some of the guys that we're going to bring up later on our list. So when you factor in, he had those limitations. The one thing he did have over everybody else was sure man strength. Not weightlifting strength, not weight room strength, Just pure man.
Pure man strength,
Just pure man. In fact, Sonny Vaccaro, the old guy who used to run the high school basketball camps years ago in the 80s and 70s, he said there's only one player that's ever come to my camp in high school that was better than my camp. And that was Moses Malone. I just told him in the middle of camp, no need for you to come tomorrow. We can't teach you anything. So that tells you how good he was.
Yeah.
And again, he did more with less. And had he been a better athlete, my guess is he'd be higher on my list. Number 6, speaking of athletes, I think he's the best athlete to ever play center, and it pains me to say because I was like, another guy better. We'll get to him later. But that's David Robinson. The way he could get up and down the floor, the way he understood how to play defense, the way he could face you up and shoot the mid-range jumper and even sometimes take you off the dribble. He had great endurance, rarely got into foul trouble, and was, like I just said, purely the best athlete I've ever seen at the center position. And he used it well. He played for the right team. A lot of these guys have to be in the right circumstance to help their success. He certainly was. He was an MVP. He was a scoring champion. He was an all-star. He was a dream teamer. And that tells you how great the list of centers must be if he did not crack the top 5, because you could easily make the case.
Oh, yeah.
You could easily make the case. And did you say you want me to go number 5 as well?
Yeah, go and do your number 5.
Number 5 is the greatest winner of all time. So that's Mr. Bill Russell. Didn't see him play, obviously. I'm not that old. I'm getting close, but not that old. But, of course, we've all heard how great he was. We have seen some of the highlights. And it's true. When you see a guy block a shot but keep the ball in bounds, he wasn't blocking a shot to get oohs and ahs from the crowd like some of the guys do nowadays.
Yeah.
He'd block a shot at starting the fast break, just like an outlet pass from a rebound. And anybody that could challenge Wilt Chamberlain in that time frame tells you how good of a defensive player that he was.
In fact, he was Chamberlain's only real competition. I didn't mean to cut you off, but to that point.
There's a couple others, but yes.
He was the only like serious, I think.
There's one or two others, but yes, he was the closest thing to him. Defensively, I don't think there's anybody better. He just understood angles. He understood his role. He was purely a winner. He was a coach and player at the same time and won a championship. And like we talked about in the previous video, what he meant socially as well. I understand that's not really what's supposed to be on the list, but I had to throw that in there. To be a star of his magnitude and have that platform and use it like he did and still conduct himself in the manner that he did tells you a lot about the person, the player, and the man.
The conscientious character that he had and the responsibility he felt.
No question about it. So, on to you, Mr. Johnson.
All right. So, interestingly enough, we had both Moses Malone at number 7. We also had the same guy at number 6, the Admiral David Robinson. 7'1", 235-pounder. Played 14 seasons, 10-time All-Star, 89-90 Rookie of the Year, led the league in rebounding, 90-91, led the league in blocks, 91-92, led the league in scoring, 93-94. So 3 years in a row, he leads the league in a major statistical category. Defensive Player of the Year, 91-92. League MVP, 94-95. Member of the original Dream Team. He once scored 71 points in a single game.
To cinch the scoring championship.
Yes, it was. The final game of the season, he scored 71 to clinch the scoring title. That is correct. He's also won, and I think you'll know the answer to the rest of this, he's one of only 4 players in NBA history to record a quadruple double. Can you tell me the other 3?
Hakeem Olajuwon, Alvin Robertson, and I'm not clear on the last, Nate Thurman?
It is Nate Thurman. Nate Thurman was the first to do it, and then I think it was Alvin Robertson, Hakeem, and then David Robinson. Robinson's quadruple double was February 17th, 1994. His stat line that night, 34 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists, 10 blocks. Career averages of 21.1 points, 10.6 rebounds, 3.0 blocks per game, and you already made a lot of the other points, but just the athleticism. He had a great spin move. He was smart. He could face up and shoot the jumper. He wasn't a Kevin Durant, Dirk Nowitzki type long-range shooter.
And few were back then.
And centers just didn't do that back then. Even Jokic is a very good three-point shooter, honestly, for a center. Robinson, Ewing, and another guy we'll both mention later were all very good 18 to 21 foot
And I would submit if they played in today's game, they would extend that to the three-point shot as well. They had the stroke to do it.
Yes, I don't have any doubt that any of those guys we just named could have done that. And Robinson, another thing, a little bit off of the basketball ability, but something I really respect. Late in his career, after he'd had some injuries, from what we know, there may have been conversations behind closed doors we don't know about. He seemed perfectly fine with the drafting of Tim Duncan, and I'm going to mentor this guy to take over and be the new star of the team because he can make our team better. Mm-hmm. We'll win a championship with us together. Yes, Popovich, it's okay. Bring this young fella in. I want to make him better. It's going to make the team better. I respect the heck out of anybody that's still basically in their prime, even though coming off of an injury, that says, let me do what's best for the team.
Well, I'm not taking away from Robinson because I think your point is legitimate. But Duncan was so good, maybe he had no choice.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Maybe he was told, here's what's happening. You can get on board or not. And again, that's why I said there may have been some conversations behind closed doors that we don't know about.
Spoiler alert, we'll be doing power forwards at some point very soon as well.
Oh, yes. So stay tuned to probably hear Tim Duncan's name again. There's 96 or 12% chance that you'll hear his name mentioned again. So yes, that David Robinson, my number 6, and I would probably agree with you on the most athletic center. It's hard not to say. It's hard to say he's not the most athletic. All right, I will now move into my number 5, and this is a guy. I'll go ahead and say this: compiling this list for me was challenging. The hardest thing was putting them in order, especially from 5 on.
I agree.
Leaving Robinson out of the top 5 was not easy for me.
I agree.
Ranking these guys from here on, y'all don't even know how much time I spent.
So before you yell and scream about our order, just understand the order you give or you think could have very well been ours.
Easily. Some of this could shuffle. This is just my opinion. Everybody on the planet can disagree with me, and that's okay. I don't mind. I'm open to talking about anything in a respectful manner. I say all that to say, I'm going to launch into my top 5 now. At number 5, the most physically dominant, powerful force in NBA history, Mr. Shaquille O'Neal. 7'1", 325 pounds. That kind of fluctuated to the 340-pound mark, I think, at certain times. But even
Ask Kobe.
Even at 340, he was in shape.
Yeah.
Like, people will joke, and sometimes him and Barkley will go back and forth, and they'll call each other fat. Shaquille's still not fat. He's just massive. And when he played, when he was in his prime, he was just a monstrously large human, but he was never fat. He could run the floor. For being so stinking big, he was pretty athletic himself.
Yes.
Not to the David Robinson level, but he had 100 pounds on David Robinson. Shaquille did play 19 seasons, 15-time All-Star, 92-93 Rookie of the Year, I think by a landslide. Led the league in scoring in 95 and 2000, which honestly I was a little shocked. In my mind, I thought he would have led the league in scoring more. That was only 2 years.
Right.
Not to take anything away from him because there's so many good scores, but that's the respect I had for his career. I thought he led the league in scoring more than that. It was only in 95 and 2000. 3-time All-Star Game MVP. League MVP in 2000, which again, a little shocking. He's only got 1 league MVP. Doesn't take away from him. But I think he's better than to only have 1. Here's what kind of makes up for that. 3-time Finals MVP.
Yes, sir.
2000, 2001, 2002. When the Lakers had their three-peat, this monstrous human was a Finals MVP all 3 years. And ask any of those other teams, who was it, the Pacers, the Nets, and the Sixers?
Yes.
There's no way. None of them had an answer for him. Mutombo, Rick Smith, it didn't matter. There were teams, the whole hack-a-shack became a common term because literally teams had to come up with something. We can't stop this guy. He's too big. He's too strong. He's just going to power over everybody and dunk on them. We got to devise a strategy. Okay, he's barely a 50% free throw shooter. We're going to send him to the line 20 times a night, at least keep him getting from 10 dunks on us.
Well, and to tell you even more about that, three-time MVP in the finals. This is a team that had Kobe Bryant on it. So
yes, Kobe would be leaps and bounds ahead of most of the. He'd be by far the best player on most teams. Shaquille was the three-time Finals MVP with Kobe Bryant, and this is a guy who, even early in his career with Orlando, was great at. I mean, just bullying over people. But even as a young player, drawing the double team and knowing when to kick it out to Dennis Scott, when to kick it out to Dennis Anderson.
And didn't get enough credit for that.
When to hit Penny Hardaway coming down the lane. And he did that his entire career with the Lakers. He constantly looked for Rick Fox, Brian Shaw, Derek Fisher, Robert Horry, Glenn Rice.
He never got the credit for his intelligence.
No,
He's
didn't.
a smarter basketball player than people give him credit for.
I indubitably concur, and if you listen to him as an analyst, that's where you find out how smart he really is. When you hear him talk about other players, and you hear him talk about how the game is played, if you didn't know how smart the guy actually is, you learn it by listening to that. And we could go on and on about how funny he and Charles Barkley are together on Inside the NBA. I will sometimes stay up and watch that and pay more attention to them than I will the game that was on.
You're not the only one.
Those guys are genuinely so funny together. And then Ernie Johnson, Kenny Smith, there's a great mixture. Love y'all's show. If you ever see this, that'd be an honor. Love what you guys do. But yeah. Shaquille, a lot of people would probably argue that he should be ranked higher. Career averages 23.7 points, 10.9 rebounds, 2.32 blocks per game. The biggest reason for me that he's only number 5, and again, this was a hard decision to rank all these out. Biggest two reasons for me that he's only number 5. He did play 19 seasons. He probably should have retired at least a couple years sooner. And again, it's not my right to say that about anybody.
Right. I mean, they can play as long as they want to.
And he was capable too, and they wanted. But to my point, after he left Miami, when he went to Phoenix, Cleveland, and Boston, he was no longer a dominant force. His last year, he was slow getting up and down the floor. And not to insult him, he's on this list. He was phenomenal. My opinion, he was a more dominant force, and he really started slowing down. And then the other thing, and this is splitting hairs, and sounds like I'm picking on him a little too much, he averaged 10.9 rebounds a game for his career. While double digits is respectable, when you're 7'1", 320 to 340, and you're just bigger and more powerful than everybody else on the floor, my goodness, you got to be getting 15 to 20 rebounds a game.
I've even heard him say that. Or let me rephrase. I've heard him say that he's aware of that criticism others have made of him.
Okay.
I can't swear that I've said he agreed with that.
Right.
But it's something he's had to deal with and address.
Yeah.
So obviously,
I've heard him
others
say,
feel that
I wasn't
as well.
a great rebounder.
Yeah.
Just go on with it. Again, not to insult him, but I'm just being honest. When there's guys that were smaller and even shorter that were better rebounders, granted, again, he played with some elite centers. He also played with George Mirasan and Yao Ming, who weren't near as good, but they had the height. Mm-hmm. Still, when you're that big and strong and athletic and you're that physically imposing, I'm sorry, 10.9 rebounds, I would rank him higher if he averaged like I think he probably should have. I think on a career low, he should have been getting 15 a game. Career high, 20. And I'm not joking. Like, that's a lot.
I can tell you're not joking.
But he does. No, I'm being serious. He was that big, and that's not an insult. That's my confidence in. I think he could have been. He's that big and that powerful. 20 rebounds a game, in my opinion. Not for a career average, but at some points, I don't think that's out of the reach. Obviously, he didn't do it, so it's hard to argue, but I think he could have. So that's one reason he's not ranked a little bit higher. So, all right, we've reached the midpoint on both of our lists. We're going to take a moment and hear a word from one of our sponsors and be right back for the rest of our top fives. Greetings. My name is Elmer E. Elmore, and I have a confession. Just last week, I was down by the holler, consorting with some bullfrogs and grasshoppers, and I just plumb lost track of time. I suddenly realized that I had told Mama I would pay her electric bill.
But I was having so much fun with the consorting and whatnot that I had done forgotten. I immediately realized that Mama would not be happy if she knew that I'd forgotten to pay her electric bill. So I invented this. The Elmer E. Elmore envelope. It looks and functions just like a standard envelope, but this here one is for paying electric bills. Get yourself one today before Mama realizes that you forgot to pay the electric bill. The Elmer E. Elmore envelope is not an actual product.
And we are back to conclude our top 10 lists. I think we left off with my number 5. So, Talmadge, why don't you give us your number 4 and number 3?
All right. Well, my number 4 is the name you just mentioned, Shaquille O'Neal. And much like Jared, I'm sure many of you out there are saying, why isn't he higher? And especially our younger audience, because for you guys, he's probably the only one you've seen to be that dominant.
Yeah.
So, but my reasons are pretty much the same. Obviously, there's some things we could take away from his game, like his free throw shooting, his rebounding prowess. You would think would be a little more, but we are splitting hairs. The bottom line here is this. You could put Shaq at number 1, 2, or 3, and you would not be wrong. It just so happens on my list, he's number 4. And then for my number 3, my favorite player, and I was tempted to put him higher. I wanted to put him higher.
I'm shocked he's not higher because I already know who you're going to say.
I was trying to be as subjective as possible.
I commend you for that.
So being objective, I've got Hakeem Olajuwon at number 3, my favorite player of all time. Real quickly, when you talk about footwork and balance, and then if you look at all the other centers, if he wasn't number 1 in an intangible category, he's probably number 2. For instance, we talked about David Robinson being the best athlete at center. I would probably say Hakeem was number 2.
He's a close number 2, honestly.
People talk about Bill Russell being the best defensive center of all time. Some say Hakeem, but if you don't say him at number 1, you probably say he's number 2. So when you talk about rebounding prowess, people say Moses Malone, but if you're not talking about Moses Malone, you're probably saying Hakeem Olajuwon. Number 2. So a lot of the categories, if you don't have him ranked number 1, he's number 2. So on my list, he's number 3. And it's only because I'm trying to be as objective as possible. Like I say, if it were up to me, he'd be number 1. Quickly, quadruple double. He also got one of those, as we talked about earlier. The big thing I'll say about that a lot of people don't know is he actually got a quadruple double the week before, the one that he's credited with. But they went back and looked at the tape, and they either took away, I can't remember, it was either an assist
that's right.
or a steal. They took it away from him.
I think they took away an assist. Okay. I forgot about that.
So he didn't get that quadruple double. So what he did was the next week he
said, I'll make sure I get it this time.
And this time he got it. So that tells you his greatness. And by the way, we all know all the NBA players that go to him even today to be trained with his footwork, which Shaquille's often said, I don't know why he wastes his time trying to show people that no one else can do it. Don't even try. But that makes the dream my number 3, reluctantly.
Okay. Well, I'll do my number 4 and number 3. And staying on topic, at number 4, I have Hakeem Olajuwon. Again, you could make a case for him being number 1 because he really was a phenomenal player. Those of you that didn't get a chance to see him, I feel a little bit bad for you because he was a sight to behold. 18 seasons, 12-time All-Star, 85 All-Rookie team, led the league in rebounding twice, 88, 89, 89, 90, led the league in block shots 3 different times, 89, 90, 90, 91, 92, 93, Defensive Player of the Year twice, 92, 93, 93, 94, League MVP 93, 94, which meant he was Defensive Player of the Year and League MVP the same time.
And Finals MVP.
And my next point, 2-time Finals MVP, 94-95. So, yes, for the 93-94 season, Hakeem accomplished something that maybe no one else ever
No one has yet.
Okay, I was going to say, I was thinking he's on the one. Regular season MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and Finals MVP. He also holds the career record for blocked shots with 3,830. One of only 4 players to record a quadruple double. The one he's credited with was March 29, 1990, 18 points, 16 rebounds, 11 blocks, 10 assists. And Talmadge's talked about the footwork. I've heard a lot of guards say that they watched tape on him to watch his footwork. The defensive presence of mind, the footwork, and he was listed as 7 foot. I've heard Chris Webber, who was 6'9", say Akeem and I were eye to eye. He was not a 7-footer. He's not even a true 7-footer. Played in an era where every team had 7-footers and still was that dominant.
The reason why they credit him at 7 feet in the pros, and this is not true, but it's legend.
Yeah.
The owner of the Rockets at that time was Charlie Thomas.
Okay.
And the general manager said, we drafted Hakeem Olajuwon, and the owner wanted a 7-footer. So he signed the check. Hakeem became a 7-footer.
I mean, hey, I don't care what his height was. The guy was a phenomenal player. And no disrespect to the Admiral, but in the 95 Western Conference Finals, David Robinson won regular season MVP that year. And David Robinson, as we both talked about, phenomenal center. Probably the most athletic of all time. One of the greatest of all time. Head-to-head against Hakeem in the Western Conference Finals that year, Hakeem didn't outplay David Robinson. He flat out made Robinson look like he was average. And Robinson's a great defensive player. I've never seen anybody leave Robinson grabbing for air like that. Hakeem's footwork, his post moves, his head fakes, he had Robinson moving, a little nod to Clint Eastwood, any which way but loose. Just really flat out outplayed him. Great jump shooter as well. Career averages 21.8 points, 11.1 rebounds, 3.1 blocks per game. Again, when you can sustain those numbers for 18 seasons, my goodness. He's arguably as good as anybody. I've got him at number 4 just because the field is so stacked from this point on.
Hey, real quickly, if you take away his 1 year in Toronto, his stats are probably a lot higher.
I'd have to calculate that, but yes, if he were just retired 1 year higher, we'd be talking about him a little bit differently, maybe at least numbers wise. All right, and then I'll go ahead and give you my number 3. At number 3, I have Bill Russell, 6'10", 215 pounds, another sub 7-footer playing the center position. Granted, he played in an era where there weren't as many 7-footers, but 13 seasons, 12-time All-Star, All-Star Game MVP 1963, 5-time regular season MVP, led the league in rebounding 4 times, career averages of 15.1 points, 22.5 rebounds, and 4.3 assists per game. So while his scoring is far less than these other guys, my goodness, 22.5 rebounds a game. And he wasn't quite 7 foot. For my money, and Hakeem's the best defensive center I've ever seen, but that's because Russell's before my time. I think Russell's probably the best defensive center that there has ever been. And he averaged 15 points a game, but he could drop 25 on you anytime he needed to. He played with John Havlicek, Bob Cousy, Casey Jones, Sam Jones. They won 11 championships.
Don't forget Don Nelson.
Don Nelson. The reason you're not hearing me mention championships, and I'll go ahead and say this because the audience does know, Talmadge does, that's a whole different category, and I will go on and on about that if you get me started. So don't get me started on how many titles somebody won. If that's what it was based on, Bill Russell would be number 1. There'd be no discussion about it. Championships is a team effort. Bill Russell never won an NBA championship. He was a member of a team that won a championship 11 times. I don't care who it is. If we're talking about Bill Russell, Michael Jordan, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Tom Brady in football, they never won a Super Bowl or an NBA championship. They might have been the best player on some teams that did it, and that still says a lot. But I don't count that when we're talking about a player's greatness. I might say if they won Finals MVP, because your team got you there, but then you were the main reason. You finished the deal. So I do place a lot of value on that. So that's why I talked about that with Shaquille earlier. And then my final point on Bill Russell. I heard Chris Webber do an interview with Bill Russell a few years ago. And Chris Webber said, man, I heard a story about you. I want to confirm with you if this is true. The first time you ever blocked a shot in an NBA game, you had never seen anyone else block a shot before. Is that correct? Bill Russell said, yeah. He said, back then they coached us to stay on our feet at all times. But I remember reading in the rule book, so again, talking about his intelligence, he said, I remember reading in the rule book that a player was allowed to leave their feet on defense. So one game I just thought, okay, I don't know why nobody else does it, but I'm going to try it. So I jumped and blocked a shot. Started a fast break. But the coach is like, Bill, what are you doing? It's like, what? I kept them from scoring. No, we don't play defense like that. Just stay on your feet. Stay on your feet. So I did. The other team scored 3 or 4 times on us. Coach said, hey, Bill, think you can do what you were doing again a while ago? Yeah. So I stood up and started blocking shots again. Think about the innovation of that. He'd never seen anybody else block a shot. Everybody that's blocked a shot since then had Bill Russell as a model.
And they've seen it.
For that. Yeah. They've seen it. Even if you didn't see Bill Russell do it, you saw somebody else who saw Bill Russell do it. He was the first guy that ever blocked a shot. He'd never seen it. Nobody taught him to do it. They tried to teach him not to, and he revolutionized the game in a way by blocking shots. And while Hakeem has the all-time record, Bill Russell might have blocked more shots in his career. We don't know. Right. They weren't keeping that stat back then.
I'm pretty certain he did.
He very well. If he didn't, he had to be darn close. And if it wasn't for Bill Russell, Hakeem might not have blocked many shots. Hakeem might have had to be the first person to block a shot ever. We don't know. So my point is, anytime somebody does something that changes the game to that extent, I got to give him a tremendous amount of credit. And he's number 3 on my list again, not because he won the championships, because I think he's the best defensive center of all time. First person ever to block a shot, and the man averaged 22.5 rebounds a game over the course of 13 seasons. Just a phenomenal basketball player.
Yes, sir.
All right, so here we are now down to our top 2. And if you're a basketball fan, you probably know the 2 guys. We're going to see if we got them in the same order. So why don't you we're going to go number 2, number 2, number 1, number 1.
All right. My number 2 is Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain. That era is Shaq for sure. The most dominating numbers-wise of any center that we've ever seen. The argument will be made, well, he was taller than everybody else. My argument back to that is, but he still had to do it. And if you tell somebody, in the 50s and 60s, well, none of this is going to count because you're just bigger than everybody else, why would they even compete? If they're going to go out there and compete and put the numbers up, they got to count. And no one put up numbers like him. Yes, people will detract because of the fact he didn't win as many championships. But as you just mentioned, I'm talking about the player itself, not the team he was on. It would have been nice, an easier argument if he had more championships for sure. But he doesn't. But his body of work stands out. And there's only one higher than him. So that's what I got to say. Wilt Chamberlain, number 2. And easily could have been number 1. If you talk to some of the older heads, they will say he's the best basketball player they've ever seen.
Yeah,
and
not
it's
just
hard to
best
argue
center.
that.
Some people say he's the best basketball player.
And speaking of changing rules, he changed rules as well because no one had ever seen what he's done or what he did. So, have him tell it before he died. He could still do it today. But I don't know if that part's true, but that's what he said. But
he would have said it, and he would have said it like he believed it.
And I'm not going to tell him that he couldn't. But number 2, Wilt Chamberlain. Who's yours?
Awesome. So here's the interesting part, and this was, again, so hard, especially to rank these last 2 guys. And interestingly enough, we got the orders reversed. My number 2 is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. 7'2", 225 pounds, 20 seasons, 19-time All-Star. Not to belabor the point we've already made, but just to be in the league. Yeah. 20 seasons, 19-time All-Star. All-Star Game MVP 1963. 5-time regular season MVP. Led the league in rebounding 4 times. Career averages. Hold on. You know what? I'm so sorry. Some of that was, I'm looking at Bill Russell's stats. Let me go back. Kareem, 20 seasons, 19-time All-Star. Rookie of the Year, 1969-1970. Led the league in rebounding 75-76. Led the league in block shots 4 times. Led the league in scoring, shockingly, only twice. 6-time regular season MVP. 2-time finals MVP. And the last time he won in the NBA Finals, last time he won Finals MVP was 1985. I think he was 38 years old. This was at a time when the Lakers had Magic Johnson, they had James Worthy. So many people were talking about Kareem as in, he's old, he's washed up, he can't keep up with McHale and Parrish. He's just hanging on. What does he do at age 38? He comes out and wins Finals MVP. Career averages 24.6 points, 11.2 rebounds, 3.6 assists, 2.6 blocks per game. Up until very recently, he had the all-time scoring record. So he's still second with 38,387 points. And I want to speak to his greatness as a scorer. Up until LeBron broke that record that it was held for nearly 40 years. So many great scorers. Y'all realize how many great scorers had come along after Kareem? Michael Jordan, Karl Malone, Dirk Nowitzki,
Dominique Wilkins,
Shaquille O'Neal, Dominique Wilkins, even guys like Charles Barkley, Kevin Garnett. There's been so many great scorers. Kobe Bryant, I can't believe I didn't think of him earlier, that didn't catch Kareem. LeBron, in his 21st season, has finally done it. But Kareem held that record almost 40 years. He had probably the most unblockable and unstoppable shot ever with the sky hook. And I could go on more about him, but I think we already know who Talmadge's number 1 is. So I'm going to leave him some time to talk about the great Kareem. So Talmadge, who's your number 1?
You just said it. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Not much more than I can add. The unstoppable, unblockable shot, all the personal accolades, all the team accolades. You could easily make the case, and not many do, but you could make the case he's the best player of all time just based on accomplishments alone.
Yeah.
People don't talk about his passing, one of the best passing big men as well. Truly the person that you could build a team around. And I don't know if that phrase was used when he was drafted, but if it was, he's the quintessential
He might have been why people started using that phrase.
Yes, that you can build a team around, a foundational piece, also socially relevant. So there's not much more than I can say except, again, if you have him lower on the list, I'm not going to argue, but you can't have him too much lower because he's pretty close to the best there ever was.
And we talked about O'Neal's intelligence and Hakeem's intelligence. Kareem's another one. Just a very smart, well-read individual. You hear him in interviews. He's not just basketball smart. Like, he's an intelligent human being. All right, so now we're down to my number 1, and I have at number 1, Sam Bowie. Okay, I'm joking. Sam Bowie, if you see this, I'm not trying to.
If you know, you know, and if you don't, look it up.
Yeah. Number 1, I have Wilt Chamberlain. This was so hard. I could have flipped a quarter. I went back and forth between he and Kareem probably for a few days. I flip-flopped the order. I was like, my initial thought was I can't choose one. They're pretty much equal. But I've pitched the idea that we're going to do our top 10 lists. I'm not going to have a tie. I don't care how hard it is. I'm going to rank them. So I've got Wilt as number 1. 7'1", 275 pounds. Like Talmadge said, he was basically the Shaquille of his generation. 14 seasons, 13-time All-Star, Rookie of the Year, 59-60, 4-time regular season MVP, All-Star Game MVP 1960 as a rookie. Led the league in scoring 7 consecutive seasons. Led the league in rebounding 11 times. Led the league in assists in 1968 with an average of 8.6. We talked about Jokic's passing ability. Chamberlain might be the next best passing center of all time. Led the league in assists with 8.6. Now, Jokic averaged 9.8 last year, which is better. But again, when you're the second best, you average 8.6 one year. Also, most points in a single game in history with 100. Most rebounds in a single game with 55. 78 career triple-doubles. Career averages of 30.1 points, 22.9 rebounds, and 4.4 assists a game. Talmadge already made the point. Some people will say, well, yeah, but that's just because he was 7'1". what would he have done in an era where he played against O'Neal and Robinson and Olajuwon? Here's my response to that, and we'll never really know, but here's my opinion. Would he have averaged 22.9 rebounds in that era with those guys? Maybe not. Would he have still been great? There's absolutely, indubitably no question in my mind. And he might have still averaged 22 rebounds. He just would have had to work harder. Bill Russell, as I mentioned earlier, was his only real significant competition. If he was being challenged by the likes of O'Neal, Olajuwon, Robinson, Ewing, even Mutombo, he might have just worked that much harder.
You never know.
I'm not going to say he couldn't have averaged 30 points and 22.9 rebounds, even in that era. Maybe not. We'll never know. But I won't say that he couldn't. The guy, if you go by sheer numbers, he's not just the best center of all time. You got to say he's the best player of all time. And we'll get to that list probably in a few more weeks. But if you go by pure numbers, I don't care. You combine his points, rebounds, and assists. Find me anybody that you can say had a better collection of that than Wilt Chamberlain. You're not gonna. I guarantee you're not gonna find it. So he's my number one. Just barely a quarter flip over Kareem. Both of them phenomenal. So anyway, there's our top 10 centers of all time list.
Real quickly, though, I want to say before we end things, while our lists were very similar, and we knew they would be, because those are the centers that are generally recognized as being the top 10. But I want to mention a few names that were hard to leave off the list. The Bill Waltons of the world when he was healthy, the Nate Thurmans who we talked about briefly. Robert Parrish was a winning center on a great basketball team. The Alonzo Mournings who were tough in his day. And if he played in a different era and the competition wasn't as strong, he might have been higher.
If Alonzo played today, he might be up on this list.
So many other players. Yao Ming if he hadn't gotten injured.
Several of those guys, if not for injuries. Parrish got old and eventually his numbers dropped off. But Walton and Yao Ming, without the injuries,
I have no doubt with Walton.
We don't know.
Ming, we could argue, because I loved him, but I'm just saying, okay, maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. Walton, if he was healthy,
in his prime,
he was going to be
when he played
maybe
for Portland
a top
in the 70s.
MVP, great passer, great college career, had everything you would want. And we didn't bring up Willis Reed. There's just Wes Unseld, so many
Willis
great
Reed
centers.
Almost made my number 10. It came down to him and Bob McAdoo for me.
Yeah.
So speaking of him.
So many. So I'm glad that we apparently know a little about basketball because our lists are very much
or
the
at least
same.
We know as much as each other.
Right. But there are several honorable mentions, and anytime you have a list like that, it's just so difficult. You don't want to shun anybody, but again, that's part of the deal. And so hopefully you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, I hope so. And to your point earlier about you don't want to shun anybody, ever so often when a Nikola Jokic comes along, who does he replace?
Somebody else
when
has to
Joel
come off
Embiid
the
comes
list.
along, who does he replace? And that's the thing that's hard. But thank you all so much for joining us again. For Talmadge Roger Vernado III, I am Jared Johnson, the Jared J. As you've heard me say before, hopefully. If you like the video, please like it. Don't be afraid to share it with people. Subscribe to the channel. It'll help us continue to bring you content and alert you when new content is ready to be viewed. Thank you all so much for your time today. Hope you have a great week, and I hope I'll see you again real soon.